Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PCI Practical Matters podcast, keeping you up to date on important topics in government contracting. Today's topic is the Better Contracting Initiative, and our speakers are Larry Allen and Emily Murphy. Take it away, Larry.
John, thanks so much. I want to welcome everybody back to the PCI Practical Matters podcast series. I am Larry Allen with Allen Federal, and it is my delight today to be joined by former GSA Administrator, former Senate Assistant Counsel, Small Business Committee, and the current Senior Fellow at the Baroni Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University, Emily Murphy. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Larry. It's great to be here with you. But I've got to say, I was a House Small Business Committee and House Armed Services Committee, never worked in the Senate.
Well, we'll give you credit for that anyway. As John indicated at the top of the show, we're here today to talk about the Better Contracting Initiative. What is that? This is the Biden administration's new initiative to improve contracting and increase the government's collective buying power to lower costs and to speed acquisitions. We're going to talk for this session to see just exactly what that might mean for you and whether or not some of these things may have been tried before and what the lessons learned were in those cases. The Better Contracting Initiative has four main pillars to it. One is leveraging data for better pricing. The second is enterprise software buying. The third is better scoped RFPs and RFQs. And the fourth is better management of so-called high-risk contracts that include things like sole source buys. Emily, the Better Contracting Initiative is supposed to deliver $10 billion in annual savings once it's in place. This is supposed to be achieved through a mix of better data usage, consolidated buying, and enhanced small business participation, more on which later. What do you think about the timing of the release of the document now, coming more than halfway into the president's first term? Is there going to be enough time and enough on the plate here to achieve the stated goals?
So Larry, it's an interesting question. First, I'm happy that there finally is a prong of the president's management agenda that addresses procurement and contracting. It was a very noticeable admission when they announced the PMA and there wasn't a government contracting section to it. But we're 3 years into the administration. Trying to put in place something that's going to turn around $10 billion a year in savings. And to be clear, they said savings and cost avoidance. It's aggressive to do with 12 months to go. If they've got 5 years to go, maybe there's more opportunity for success there. But it's going to be hard to get put in place without a confirmed OFPP administrator. With changes inevitably in the third year or the fourth year of an administration, you see a lot of turnover. So you're going to be seeing a lot of the senior politicals turning over right now. And so getting them behind it's going to be a challenge. I'd say the other challenge you're going to have is where this $10 billion number came from. Because when I was at GSA, we were able to deliver, I think it was $21.6 billion in 3 years of savings, worth of savings in 3 years. So $10 billion really isn't that much in terms of savings. But and all of these sort of sound like great ideas, but it'll be interesting to see how they're actually implemented and whether or not there are legs for them to actually deliver that savings.
Right now, do you think, for example, that the lack of an Office of Federal Procurement Policy Administrator might hamper this? I mean, you don't absolutely have to have one. It's not like the Office of Federal Procurement Policy Administrator comes with their own army of soldiers, but it's still a focal person to go out and be the lead cheerleader. It's an identifiable source, and we just don't have that right now.
We don't. We've got a senior advisor right now who's sort of filling the role. And Leslie Field, Matthew Blum, I mean, there are great people in that office.
Yes.
But I saw this in the Trump administration as well. We didn't have an confirmed OFPP administrator until the end of the administration when Michael Wooten came in. And it was hard for OFPP to be driving the dialogue, controlling the narrative, or really even pushing forward unifying policies when, honestly, GSA, DOD, and NASA, and then DHS and the other agencies all were sort of going their own way, and there was no one person to sort of wrangle us in.
Right, and to me, I think the Better Contracting Initiative is very well intended, as you say, but it seems like if you're going to do this, the timing for doing it is a little off. You either want to do it, I would guess, at the beginning of the term or close to the beginning of the term, so you've got that momentum and you've got people's attention, or you'd want to wait maybe for a second term if the voters decide to give you a second term. So we're going to have to see a little bit about how the Better Contracting Initiative plays out overall. And I think your point, Emily Murphy, about whether or not there are $10 billion in savings to be wrung out of the acquisition system remains to be seen. I mean, I suppose you can cancel a couple of weapon systems, that takes big chunks out here and there, but you know, that's not without risks as well.
Although if you look at the wording behind the initiative, they said savings or cost avoidance. And so when you start to say cost avoidance, it makes it much, much easier to hit that number, which is why I was curious as to how, like, if you're going to count cost avoidance, you should be able to come up with, frankly, a much more impressive number than 10 billion. 10 billion is a lot of money. But as I said, at GSA, we were able to find somewhere in the $7 to $8 billion a year cost avoidance and savings number while I was there. So if you were to sort of take that same set of principles, extend them government wide, I think that you could find more, actually. So I applaud them for putting something out. I applaud them for pushing this forward. It's interesting that it doesn't really hook into several of the other initiatives that have come out on government contracting. So greenhouse gas, the SDB goaling, there are all sorts of things that the administration's been doing in the government contracting space. Tons of executive orders on government contracting, but there's no linkage between this and everything else that's been happening.
I think that's an excellent point. You know, certainly this administration isn't the first one to try to affect social change through the government acquisition system, but they have been very aggressive in doing that. One of the 4 pillars of the Better Buying Initiative, however, that is not necessarily socioeconomic related, but really kind of one of those core functionalities of government acquisition, is negotiating common enterprise software licenses. That is leveraging the government's collective buying power and getting away from specific agency contracts for all kinds of common use software. Emily, this isn't the first time this has been tried, is it?
No, if you go back to 2003, the Office of E-Government, which is now the Office of Federal CIO, OFPP, and GSA all came together and said, we're going to do something like this called Smart Buy. And Smart Buy actually still exists, but Smart Buy went out and put in place enterprise licenses for things like Oracle software. I think that IBM was they had an agreement in place with IBM at one point, but it quickly lost momentum. And I think that there are a couple key reasons why.
Yeah, well, why don't you give us your insights on that? That was going to be my follow-up.
So when you look at how the government buys software licenses, you first of all have to look at who's willing to sell to you directly. And in a lot of cases, the software manufacturers don't want to be prime contractors. They prefer to be subcontractors because they can or vendors, because they can put a lot of the liability at the prime contractor level. They can take a lot of the compliance and put it up at a different level. Additionally, the government frequently likes using IT value-added resellers to buy their software licenses, because they frequently need someone to come in, and there's a service component to implementing any new software or keeping it up to date. And by doing it that way, if 15 to 50% of the spend is done on services, they can go through an IT VAR and count all the dollars, though, as small business. So you can get sort of a bump up on small business dollars, which has been great for meeting the small business goals.
And right, and we talked a little bit about, you know, one of the major initiatives that the administration is trying to do at the same time as the Better Contracting Initiative is increase small business participation. Yet there are an awful lot of small businesses that sell common use software to the government. It seems here like we kind of have some conflicting goals, Emily. How do you think that could sort itself out?
Well, I think what we've seen in the past is that unless there's an extreme amount of discipline by the administration, they are going to, really enforce the use of these enterprise licenses. What you'll see is initial adoption, and some of that work will shift to any new contract they put in place. But over a couple of years, invariably something will have changed, and some agency will find they can get a better deal, either striking their own contract or by going through one of the IT VARs. And at that point in time, you'll see everything start to peel away. And frankly, that's one of the problems when you have an enterprise contract is you're negotiating software at a given point in time, not for what the world's going to look like 24 months from now or 36 months from now, and what pricing and compliance requirements are going to be in place. So what we've seen, and what I would be hard pressed to say why we wouldn't see again, is an initial bout of success, and then really, within a period of a few years, everyone goes back to doing things the same way again, because it's an easy way, or an easier way, to meet their small business goals. It's an easier way. They can frequently get a better price because you're no longer looking at one fixed point in time, and they're getting the customization of the software that they need.
And that customization is really a key issue. I mean, you and I have both seen people can buy the same off-the-shelf software, but each agency has a slightly different mission. Even sometimes within agencies, there are different missions. And whether it's true that requires a software modification, the fact is that many different subsets of agencies believe that they have to have software tailored specifically for their needs. And to your point, Emily, that's where the customization from the IT VARs comes in. A lot of those are small businesses. So I want to say that, as I call this, son of smart buy, will work out. But I think that your predictions are pretty much right on. I think we'll maybe see an initial surge of use, and then slowly people will figure out that they're not getting all of the service and support that they need. Similarly, there may be some small businesses that they understand how to get to Capitol Hill and let their elected officials know. I know from your experience just what they're feeling, right?
Well, and in certain cases, for example, if I'm the Department of Veterans Affairs and I post Kingdomware must first buy from a service-disabled veteran or a veteran, does this new initiative give me a justification for going around that to the software manufacturer, or do I still need to go through that service-disabled veteran-owned small business? And
right.
You probably still have to go through the SDVOSB.
And that's an excellent point as well. So I think what we're going to have to do in terms of this part of the Better Contracting Initiative is watch this space. But I think there are some hurdles here that we've identified. We'll have to see how the administration addresses those. We'll have to see how specific agencies address them. You are listening to the PCI Practical Matters podcast. I'm your host today, Larry Allen. My guest is Emily Murphy, Senior Fellow at the Baroni Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University. Emily and I are talking this session about the Biden administration's recently released Better Contracting Initiative. Emily, I want to shift gears here for a second and talk about another pillar of the 4 pillars of the Better Contracting Initiative. One way the administration hopes to achieve savings in this program is through the use of better procurement documents. Things like better statements of work, more concise and realistic requests for proposals, more concise contract scopes. At the core of this, Emily, really means investing in the acquisition workforce, doesn't it? I mean, we have to ensure that the acquisition workforce has both the education and the tools that they need.
And the time that they need. Because I think that one of the things we've seen with a lot of contracts is that because it's so hard to get a contract in place these days, between protests and funding issues and continuing resolutions, and so on and so forth, that if you're going to do a larger contract, you want it to have the broadest scope you possibly can, so you can do as much as possible through it. Because it's going to be such a hurdle to get that awarded. You look at the latest GWACs and the battles they've had to get those in place. So I think that's part of it. But we're still asking the acquisition workforce that we've got to be fighting that battle. At the same time, we're saying we want them to do a better job with scope documents and making sure that we've really got the right requirements in place. Well, you're asking them to do this in a vastly compressed time frame. Because this year, they'll get maybe 6 months or so to put in place any new contract vehicles instead of 12 months for fiscal 24. By the time that, assuming that all the appropriations bills are done by the beginning of February, by the time the money makes it to the agencies, you're going to be into the third quarter of the fiscal year. So you're asking them for that. We need to be giving them either more resources or more training or something else to do this. It's not enough to just say do better, because the people we've got doing the work are doing an amazing job of it, and they need to have better tools to do it.
Time really is a factor in this. It's not like we have the acquisition workforce just sitting around waiting for things to do or anticipating how they might address these specific issues. I mean, even though we don't have full year appropriations right now, the government's still open for business. There's ongoing contracts that still need to be managed. There are follow-on pieces of work that are being awarded, and we still really don't have the numbers in the acquisition workforce. We've talked a little bit about getting some training for the acquisition workforce. What are some of your recommendations, Emily, on how the workforce could be trained to support these goals?
I know that GSA has a proposal to increase the percentage of the funds collected off of any schedule contract or anything else that uses an industrial funding fee that will then go towards FAI and the Acquisition Workforce Training Fund. I think that's a good start, but I think that you need to have more just-in-time training. I think that some of the issues also in terms of scope is making sure that we have contracting officers who are well versed in what it is that we're buying. So again, I think Jeff Kostis has done some great things at GSA in trying to create a curriculum around an IT certification or for contracting officers, so that they really proving that they've got the skills to go and do this better. Frankly, the other part of it is better sharing from agency to agency, so that we're not reinventing the wheel every single time that we're trying to put out a different procurement, and more reliance on those multiple award contracts when we can, so that we can actually allow the contracting workforce, the acquisition workforce, to be focusing on unique requirements rather than duplicating the same work again and again.
And that's really, I think, whether it's better contracting initiative or whether it's the types of contracts and acquisitions that the government does today, we really want to talk about how to support the acquisition workforce better. And this has been a topic that predates even my long-term involvement in government acquisition. The acquisition field just never slows down. It never really looks exactly, if you look at it 3 years ago, it doesn't look like what it looks like today. And if you looked at it 3 years down the road, it would be different still. So whether we're talking better contracting initiative or other work for the acquisition workforce, the key is to empower these people, give them the tools they need to drive the outcomes that we want. And we're always, realistically, we're always going to have some type of conflicting pressures and outcomes, but you want to give the acquisition workforce the power and the leeway and the knowledge and support to make good business decisions. Whether or not they're always the ones that are the prevailing policy, we don't know, but they ought to have the ability to use their training and skill and experience and we ought to stand behind them when they make good business decisions.
And it
Emily,
does work, continue to put more and more burden on that acquisition workforce to become experts in areas that are only tangentially related to government contracting also. So if we're going to start asking people to become experts in labor or in greenhouse gas emissions or things like that, we need to provide them additional resources and support. Because otherwise we're never actually going to be able to buy anything.
Right. I mean, we're asking the acquisition workforce to really go outside of acquisition increasingly, whether it's environmental rules, whether it's labor law, things of that nature. The acquisition workforce is going to be exceptionally well skilled to do all kinds of things. Emily, as I mentioned at the top of the show here, there are 4 pillars in the Better Contracting Initiative. We've discussed most of them, but we haven't talked about the 4th pillar, which is getting better prices, especially where sole source or high risk procurements are involved. What are some of the benefits, but maybe some of the hidden pitfalls or risks of this type of an approach?
So I think one of the challenges we have is we look at all sole source contracts as being created equal, rather than acknowledging that there are certain sole source contracts that Congress has said these shall be sole source contracts. So when we talk about contracting with 8A companies, when we talk about phase 3 SBIRs, when we talk about the work that's done with mandatory sources, we need to stop. We need to come up with some best practices on how we're going to conduct pricing in those areas, but we need to stop acting as if contracting officers who award those contracts have somehow failed to get the right amount of competition, because they've done exactly what Congress told them to do. And one of the things I feel strongly about is that we should, when we manage or when we report on the competition rates, we should take out those that are mandatory sole sources and not consider that as a true reflection on the competition rates. It should be looked at separately. But I think then in those other high risk cases, the question would be what kind of data, what kind of information is actually going to be useful? Because right now we're almost at a point of creating so much data that it's going to be very hard for contracting officers to navigate it unless there's some sort of approach that's put in place. One of the pillars actually of the Better Contracting Initiative is this proposed OMB circular on procurement data. Well, we have so much procurement data from things like the transactional data requirement that GSA put into place. We were collecting, or at least the idea behind the best-in-class contracts was we were getting all sorts of transactional data. I think it would be better to focus on how we're using that data first before we go out and create yet another requirement to collect more data or to use a new different data set. It concerns me that, again, we're losing our focus on the fact that while government contracting can accomplish amazing things in addition to buying the goods and services the government needs, buying those goods and services has to be the primary requirement. And then everything else has to be, the other things have to be additive rather than distractions or impediments to actually getting the right things at the right price.
Yeah, Emily, one of the things that I've always thought about data is that it's a tool, and it's a tool like any other tool, which means it can be well used, it can be poorly used, but unless you're putting together a bookshelf from IKEA, you're going to be using more than one tool, right? So I'd be interested in your opinion. My thought about data is that while it's important that placing data and data usefulness as a sole outcome, a sole input, if you will, to how you get better acquisition decisions, kind of won't get you there unless you've got people who can analyze the data and use the skills and experience they have to take that and other inputs to make good acquisition decisions. Am I off base here?
No, I think you're absolutely on track. And I mean, the fact of the matter being that saving a penny here or a penny there in a way that will cost us tens or hundreds of dollars to collect and store data or that's going to drive companies out of the industrial base isn't really a savings. We need to actually figure out what data is essential, how we're going to use it, and put some good parameters on so that it informs the decisions that contracting officers are able to make. It doesn't dictate the decisions that they're making, because otherwise we're going to get stuck back in the lowest price technically acceptable. And while that might be okay for certain types of items, we've all seen how poorly that can turn out when we're buying anything that's in any way complex, or that where we really want to be looking at the best long-term solution for the government.
Right. And I think all of this is a good, important discussion to have. Let me follow up with one last question. When we're pushing for better pricing, and we're all taxpayers, we all want the government to get a good deal, how do we lower acquisition costs without setting unrealistic pricing expectations? I mean, you and I have both seen that a little bit of pressure on the gas pedal for low prices sometimes creates an outsized effect or impact at the contracting officer level, where people feel that unless they're absolutely getting 20% reductions over what they already have, they're not doing their job. And that can be a negative outcome too. So how do we avoid that type of thing so that people get the message about good values and better costs, but also at some point that curve flattens out, right?
And it's a good question. And the first thing that pops to mind, just because it's where I'm doing some research right now, is frankly using the tools we've got out there. I mean, if we would use the government purchase card to pay for things under $100,000, we would get a rebate on all of those purchases. And that's a off the top savings. If we would actually use multiple award contracts, whether it be schedules, whether it be GeoX, whether it be the cost savings and the time savings that are associated with those vehicles, very high. I was very sad to see the court this year overturn what GSA was trying to do with Polaris, which was to say that let's award contracts at the beginning of the contract, these multiple award contracts at the beginning, based solely on technical qualifications, and then do a really aggressive price competition at the task order level when we know the definitive requirement, and let's price it out once we've got the definitive requirement. Unfortunately, the Court of Federal Claims overturned that and said that that wasn't permissible. I'm hoping that someone's going to come back and put that back in place, because to me, that would be a great way of making sure that we're getting the best prices, but we're getting the best prices from the best solutions, on the best solutions. We're not getting the best prices on the cheapest solutions.
Because if you have to buy cheap, you have to buy again, and that increases your acquisition costs, and it ties up your acquisition workforce.
It does.
My guest today on the PCI Practical Matters podcast has been Emily Murphy, former GSA administrator, currently senior fellow at the Baroni Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University. Emily, thank you so much for being with me today.
Larry, it's been a real pleasure. I love talking about these issues. Thank you.
It's been a great conversation about the Better Contracting Initiative, and you can learn a lot from Emily. I'm just here for window dressing, which tells you what type of window it is. But even so, I'm Larry Allen, and on behalf of the PCI Practical Matters podcast, I want to thank you for tuning in today. We'll be back next time with another exciting chapter in the annals of government acquisition.
Thank you, everyone. This has been the PCI Practical Matters podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you listen next time.
There you go. That was fabulous.
That
Emily,
was
what great
I'm sorry I expected you on my title there, on my past, but the Senate gets
No,
very
that's all right.
weird. Yeah.
That's all right. You got to get it right.
Hopefully, it's too controversial there, but I'll say the one on contract scope offends me the most, because it suggests that our contracting officers aren't doing the best job they can right now. And it sounds good on paper, but when you look at it, it just really, contracting officers are doing everything they can to meet every requirement the government's throwing at them right now. And we put them in an almost untenable position.
Right. And one of the things that we're seeing is, stuff inevitably either slips through the cracks, or there are some things that are in fact judgment calls. And if you make a judgment call and there's an opportunity for a protest, there are plenty of people who will do that. That's my concern about Polaris, and my concern about the NIH CISP4 is that neither one of those are going to ever get out the door. I had a conversation a few months ago with Laura Stanton. I told her straight up, I said, if it were up to me, I wouldn't do a new Polaris. I'd say, I got my vets, I got my 8A stars, I've got small business companion contracts going on Oasis Plus, which is, services, but still, I can show my small business bona fides with the schedules program. I'm doing it. So.
Well, I mean, and the challenge she's got is that, I mean, Polaris, people forget, was the follow-on to Alliance 2 small business, because that died because of protests.
Right.
Now you've got Polaris was a protest, and everyone's going to keep protesting. One thing I think is going to be fascinating to see how SBA ever resolves this Meta-Protégé joint venture issue, because they've just put their hands up and been like, nothing we can do, which isn't true at all.
Right, and my feeling is that I don't know if the SBA is going to provide that guidance. They could, that'd be great. I've always thought that we're going to end up with the de facto rule as established by case precedent.
Yeah. Well, and it was, if SBA would actually put something out in either their guidance or in their regulations, and they've got the complete authority to do that, they could fix this problem that we're having. My fear is that if they don't fix it, Congress will fix it for them. And I say this having been the person in Congress who's tried to fix things for them before, sometimes that makes it worse.
Right, well, right, and I think a lot of people who, at the staff level anyway, would say exactly that, please don't make us fix this. It won't be precise, it won't be pretty, so.
No, so, I mean, I think that's going to be interesting. What they're going to end up doing with the 8A program is going to be fascinating to watch. This change with the service-disabled veterans is going to be interesting. But I'm doing research right now, and hopefully it'll be out in January sometime, on what would happen if we raised the micro purchase threshold.
Oh, I think that'd be great, yeah.
And unfortunately, the data sort of comes out into we'd save a ton of administrative cost money, just even raising it $10,000. But small businesses would not do well.
Oh, is that right? Right. So
they would cut into the small business reserve. So even if you raise then the simplified acquisition threshold, which would be even better, then you still have small businesses sort of suffering. But I also found that only about 47 or 48% of non-multiple award contracts that go, so not looking at task orders that are under the simplified acquisition threshold, are going to small businesses, even though 100% of them are supposed to be reserved for small business.
Right. Right. That doesn't surprise me. It does not surprise me. I'm frankly surprised that it's as high as it is. So
I was too, actually. Well, and then you start looking at what happens with Smart Pay. About 30% of the dollars end up going to small business on Smart Pay. Frankly, though, the other question I'd have is, at what point in time do we stop considering paying small businesses to resell something to us to be the equivalent of paying small businesses to build or design or implement something for us? Right now, we treat them as if those are all equal functions. And you've been involved with NIB before. I don't know if you still are representing them or not. But if I were NIB, I'm not sure that the small business is reselling my stuff. All it does is raise the prices of the stuff that I'm selling.
Right.
Which makes everyone else want to go around them.
Now, NIB,
and it's harder to track.
NIB really never wanted GSA to close down the depots, and that was their main way of selling through things. But that was going to be inevitable anyway. So we'll have to see. They're going to get a new president next year.
I heard that. I actually heard from someone who was thinking about throwing his hat in the ring, and I was a little surprised on it. So I'm curious, do you have any data on or any information on who they're looking at?
I haven't talked to Kevin. I talked to Angela Hartley.
Okay.
And Angela seems to think they might be looking for a blind candidate. So we'll see. There's some, she said, and she knows there's some qualified ones out there.
Yeah.
I think they're also, he's not interested in it. They're definitely looking for an outsider. So I think they're looking to shake things up a little bit, see how it goes.
I'm surprised they don't do more protests. They don't challenge more stuff.
I have always been surprised about that as well. I mean, when you're talking about advocating on behalf of blind workers, you've got a pretty strong case.
They're incredibly sympathetic. I mean, it's a great story to tell.
Right. And, sometimes, they still are clients of mine, but and one of the things I do for them is I set up some discussions with different agencies on different topics. There are some people that don't even want to talk about blind workers. So that's always fascinating to me. And I think.
Yeah, you brought them in to see me in 2017 before I was even confirmed.
I'm sorry?
You brought them in to see me in 2017 before I was even confirmed. So I don't know if you remember that, but you brought in some of the folks.
Yes, I do remember that. Yes, I do remember that. When you were barely alive.
I was. We were running around like chickens with our head cut off at that point in time, trying to figure out which way was up.
All right, we've taken up more than enough of John's time, but John, thanks very much for setting this up. I appreciate it. All right, Emily, thanks very much. Next time I'm in DC, we'll catch up.